Hello, everyone. Steve Edelman here, just out of the shower, super early in the morning. Can you believe it is 5 a.m.? I am so excited to give this lecture that I've been thinking about for a long time. Diabetes on the cheap, or diabetes on a budget for people with type 1 diabetes. I want to talk about how you can control your diabetes if you don't have health insurance, if you have huge copays that you can't afford. How do you use the older medications and tools to adequately control your diabetes as good as anybody else? Okay, let's start. Well, congrats to all of you for joining our virtual conference and health fair. This is what it looked like when we were doing face-to-face conferences. Our last one was as short as the end of February, just before COVID hit. Now we're virtual, and we have the vFairs platform, which is excellent. And we try to make it as engaging as possible. There's some of the star TCOYD faculty, Tricia Santos, Schaefer Bader, and of course, Jeremy Pettis. And you are probably sitting at home looking at the computer. Now, this was a lecture that Schaefer Bader and I gave. It's going to be in our video vault. And who do you think that woman is staring at longingly? Moi. Not that Schaefer's 30 years younger or more. Diabetes is not a rare disease. It's super common, but it's not an inexpensive disease either. It takes so much money to stay in good health, buying the things that we need. The purpose of this presentation, I want to make sure this is very clear. For those of you living with type 1 diabetes, do not have access to the latest and greatest devices, pumps, and continuous glucose monitors, or the newer insulins, including inhaled insulin. These are all costly. I will attempt to show you how to economically control your diabetes well with generic insulins and home glucose monitors, the little meters where you prick your finger. I know, pricking your finger absolutely sucks, but it gives us important information. So in 1923, 4 gentlemen got the Nobel Prize. I tell you their names, there's no way you'd remember them, but you can see on the left-hand side, Banting and McLeod, and they're 2 grad students. They discovered insulin. Fast forward, 48 years later, 1970, I was diagnosed with type 1, and believe it or not, the therapy in 1970 was the same as 1923. Now that's not me, that's Spanky. There's me as a counselor at a boys camp in Griffith Park, Los Angeles. Now, please don't laugh at that. My story with type 1, I was on 1 shot a day, I was urine testing, very strict diet. They didn't have insulin pumps, they didn't have pens, they didn't have newer insulins, they didn't have the A1C test, they didn't even have glucose meters, and certainly they did not have continuous glucose monitoring. Now, I didn't really have the best diabetes doctor at that time. I had someone that really didn't know anything about type 1, and my control was terrible. That's a whole different story. But the point I'm trying to make is that my therapy was the same as in 1923. This is the education sheet that I was shown when I was first diagnosed, hospitalized, when I went into ketoacidosis. Well, the needle was huge. And of course, they're not that big now, but of course this picture makes it look larger than it was back then. Look at the diet. Roast beef with a little bit of lard around the outside, whole milk, eggs, canned green beans, and of course the apple was fine. And of course, there was the exercise. Now, I just want to show you, 2 pictures of 2 famous endocrinologists, Jeremy Pettis, when he was 15 years old, and he first got diagnosed with type 1, and myself, I played football in college, and we both have so many similarities, but the one thing that's important, we both have type 1, we both been living with it, we both lived through the dark ages, and we're both dedicated to helping people with diabetes take control of their diabetes and educating healthcare professionals. So I'm not going to talk about continuous glucose monitoring too much because I'm going to assume that you don't have one. And if you have one, we have lots of lectures, including Think Like an Endo, but the Dexcom G6, the Libre 2, and there's the Eversense, the implantable continuous glucose monitor. So we have 3 good choices. And of course, there's the Medtronic that's been around for a while. Now, I'm going to assume that you're going to be using home glucose monitoring. It's got to be one of the most important tools to take and stay in control of your diabetes. There's no way any type 1 can be in halfway decent control without being able to test their blood sugar. Now, it doesn't give you as much information as a continuous glucose monitor, but it can give you enough. And these are 3 excellent meters. The one thing that bugs me as someone living with diabetes, why are these numbers so normal? Why don't they come up with an advertisement that looks like this? And maybe a little voice comes out of a little tiny speaker when you're over 200, son of a, or damn. And how about when you're above 200, a little song comes on? It's all possible. Come on, it's software. I learned those moves from Jeremy Pettis. How often should you test? Well, I'm going to just shoot straight up for good control. Minimum before each meal and bedtime. That's 4 times a day. Now, for much better control, add in tests between widely spaced meals before and after exercise. There's no shortcuts. You need to know your blood sugar. And some of these meters, you can get really good finger stickers that barely feel it when they prick your finger. You can adjust the distance. Even if you have insurance, maybe it's not good insurance, there's not an insurance company alive that would not give you a glucose meter as part of your coverage. Now, if you don't have insurance, there's the Rely On meters at Walmart, $10 for the meter, and 50 strips for $14. That's really, really inexpensive. They used to be $1 a strip, and the meter's $50, $60, $70. So this is important for you to have. Now, why do I have written there how many minutes in a day? Well, there are 1,440 minutes in one day. And if you testing your blood sugar 4 times, you might think you're really cool, you're on top of it. But it really, and because a glucose meter just gives you a blood sugar at one point in time, it doesn't give you that much information. So I've told you the minimum. So the more you test, the better off you'll do. I'd like you to think of it this way. Your meter's your friend. Find ways to spare your fingertips, rotate the sites. I used to test 10, 12 times a day, and I would develop calluses, and then I would get the blood through the callus. So my callus, you had to go a little deeper, but it didn't hurt as much because I had calluses. But everyone's got their technique. Go onto Google and type in best techniques to use a finger sticker. You'll get some really good diabetes educators giving you some suggestions. Look at this. Even the Rely On meter, it says 101. Come on, folks, be real. For all you meter companies, put a high number on there. I dare you. Now, what about your hemoglobin A1C? You can buy the kits at the store. I don't know if you knew that. They're about $8 to $12 for one test. There's different brands. This A1C Now kit is very good, super accurate. And I would test every 3 to 6 months, but it depends on your control. If you know your glucose levels are really good, nothing's changing, your last A1C was good, you probably don't need to do it more often than every 6 months. So, it really depends how you're doing. And of course, look at the A1C value, 6.3. Hey, that's too low. You're gonna have a lot of hypoglycemia. So even the A1C kit people, they just don't have any kahungas. Put a high number on there, like a lot of us. So let's talk about basal insulin first. It's really important to have your basal insulin dose set correctly. Third cup of coffee. This slide shows the time action profile of the older insulins. Why do I have NPH and glargine highlighted? Because these are very inexpensive. NPH is the older basal insulin. I say it like that because it's more intermediate acting. You have to take NPH at least twice a day if you're going to take it as a basal. And we don't really like basal insulins that peak like that. But thank goodness, glargine, which is also called Lantus, one of the most prescribed basal insulin in history, the chemical name is glargine, that you can now get it in a generic form. It lost patent protection. And you can see that it's pretty flat. Now, the insulins on this slide in red are the ones that are inexpensive and generic. So we're going to talk about fast-acting insulins in a little bit. Regular and generic Humalog, which is a fast-acting insulin. Excuse me. Don't talk while you're drinking. And then we talked about intermediate acting NPH, and at the very bottom, generic glargine. Now, I want to show you that glargine or Lantus is not perfect. You can see up above here that Lantus in the dashed line, it does have a peak, and it does lose activity towards the end of the day. That's why I want you to remember this fact. If you take Lantus, take it at bedtime. Why? Because if you're going to lose activity around 9 o'clock, you got at least, if you're like most people, you eat dinner, you take some fast acting, that holds you over until your next shot of Lantus. And Toujeo and Tresiba are the newer basal insulins. They are better, but trust me, you can do okay on Lantus. But just remember, take Lantus at bedtime. Now, this is a picture of some of these inexpensive insulins. Basaglar and Semglee are two generic Lantuses, about $25 a bottle. You might even get it cheaper. Then there's, you can rely on insulin syringes, which are inexpensive, and you can get bottles of regular and NPH for $24 a bottle. Now, if you're going to use NPH, it's important, and I'll talk more about that later, but it's important to take it in the morning and also at bedtime because NPH won't last 24 hours. Okay, how do you know if your basal dose is right? This is a key question. Well, it's called basal testing. Have an early dinner. Test on a night when your blood sugar at bedtime and after dinner is between 120 and 180. Now, if you have a continuous glucose monitor, which I doubt, you want your horizontal trend arrow like this to know that you're flat, you're not changing. If you're relying on a glucose meter, you're going to test a few times after dinner and then before bedtime and make sure they're fairly equivalent. You're going to know your blood sugar at bedtime, fast the next morning, and your morning blood sugar should be about 30 milligrams per deciliter above or below your bedtime value. That tells you your basal dose is set correctly. And you may have to do this more than once. But if you don't have your basal dose set correctly, you're not going to have a good foundation to build the fast-acting insulin on top of that. So here's a patient who tested at bedtime, which was 155. After fasting overnight, you can see the morning was 105. This is a continuous glucose monitoring tracing, but even if this patient just tested their blood sugar, they would have gotten those same values. And it's too much of a difference. It's like 40 points, and it's drifting down. So you want to check it again, but in reality, you might want to do a reduction in the Lantus at night. So what about bedtime intermediate or long-acting insulin? At Lantus, most people, 90% plus, just need to take their Lantus at bedtime. If you're on NPH, it's the least expensive insulin on the market, you would take it at bedtime and in the morning. And so that's really important. And you're really supposed to titrate your basal dose to get your morning blood sugar at goal. Because NPH peaks out in 18 hours, you want to take a little bit of NPH in the morning. Now, believe it or not, you can also test your basal during the day. On a different day that you tested overnight, you might have an early breakfast, or if you're someone who can skip breakfast, like me, You just watch your blood sugars when you wake up. And if your basal dose is set correctly, your blood sugar should not be creeping up and should not be creeping down. Don't forget that just the act of waking up will raise your blood sugar. So you got to keep that in mind as well. Okay, let's talk about mealtime insulins. Pre-meal, we have rapid acting insulins, which is the which is the Humalog. Then we have regular insulin, the older fast acting. And you can see regular insulin peaks. You can see it starts to work a little later than rapid acting insulin, and it stays around for a long time. For a mealtime insulin, you want rapid on, rapid off. So if you can get the generic Humalog called Admalog, you can see that right in the upper section right here. Let's see if I can find it for you. Well, I don't have my pointer working right now, but you can see generic Humalog and Admalog. That would be your first choice. And then if you can get regular, which is Humulin R, Novolin R, that's probably going to be a little cheaper, but check into the prices. So the first choice would be they use Humalog, generic Humalog, and the second would be using regular. This is the newer, faster acting insulins, which is called Fiasp or Lumjev. And they do work faster and they get out of your system quicker than the older insulins that I just mentioned. If you can get free samples of this, that's good, but you can do pretty darn well with a generic Humalog. Now, what about inhaled insulin? I'm not going to talk about it too much, but it is an amazing product. That's the size of the inhaler, and you see the cartridge over here in blue, and the inhaled insulin starts to work immediately, and it's gone by 90 minutes. And that's compared to the line with the black dots, which is rapid acting insulin, quote unquote. So inhaled insulin is an awesome insulin. It reaches an unmet need in type 1, where you get better post-meal blood sugars, less delayed hypoglycemia. But if you don't have insurance, it's going to be tough to afford that. So basically, this is the poor man's insulin pump. Rapid acting insulin with every meal and snack, yes, including snacks, especially ones that have carbohydrates. If you're going to eat some celery sticks, obviously you don't need any insulin for that. And some type of basal insulin like Largy. And that's basically a poor man's insulin pump. Now, if you look at number 2 is important. Glucose monitoring is the key. And you need to determine your insulin to carbohydrate ratio and your insulin sensitivity factor or correction factor. I'm going to show you how to do that. I'm glad this is taped because you can stop the frame and digest it, because it may take you a little more time. I'm a math genius, so I go through the numbers pretty quickly. You need to calculate your correction factor. It's how much your blood sugar will drop with 1 unit of fast-acting insulin. And correction factor is a good phrase. It's how much you're using this formula to bring your blood sugar down to your goal range, 120, 130. So you use the 1800 rule. You divide 1800 by your total daily dose of insulin, basal insulin and fast acting. So here's the example. Let's just say you're on 35 units of Lantus a day plus 40 units of fast acting insulin a day. That's 75. 75 into 1800 is 24. So basically, you round it off to 25. And what does that mean? 1 unit of fast-acting insulin should drop you about 25 points. Now, this is not always exact, trust me, but it's a place to start from. You may need to change that over time. And so if you're going to be correcting for a high, let's say your blood sugar is 220. Let's say your goal is 120. So 220 minus 120 is 100 points. That means you want to drop your blood sugar 100 points. You're going to take 4 units extra of fast-acting insulin. If you're going to be eating at the time you're 220, you want to add that on to the dose you're going to take for the carbs, which we'll talk about next. Or if you're just working and you're not going to be eating and you want to come down and get out of the high range, just give yourself 4 units. So that's basically the correction factor. Now, let's go to the next slide. How do you count your carbs? We typically count carbs to figure out how much insulin to take before meals. So how much insulin you need for carbohydrates. So this is the 400 rule. Divide 400 into your total daily dose, just like the 1800 rule. So here's the example. If you're on 25 of Lantus a day plus 30 units of fast-acting insulin, that's a total of 55. 55 into 400 is 7.28 grams of carbs for every every unit of fast-acting insulin. So you round it off to 7, and let's just say you're about to take a meal with 60 grams of carbs. So you divide that by 7, which comes out to be 8.5 units of insulin. So if you're going to eat 60 grams of carbs, you're going to take 8 or 9 units and probably round it off. I doubt if you're on a pump, because then you wouldn't be diabetes on the cheap watching this lecture. So remember that these are just places to start from. You can always give a little more, you can give a little less of the correction factor and the insulin for carbohydrates. You sit down to a meal, let's say you're 220, you're going to be eating 60 grams of carbs. You're going to take 4 for the correction, 8.5 or 8 for the food, and you're going to take 12 units of insulin. That's how most type 1s do it. Now, I want to tell you something extremely important. Timing is everything. It's so important. That's why I got 12 kids. I didn't pay attention to the timing. I'm kidding. This slide shows the peak blood sugar in a group of type 1s that we standard meal when they take their insulin 20 minutes before eating, at the time of the meal, or 20 minutes after. So these folks right here, you can see that these folks, where the arrow goes up, their peak postprandial, they started off around 155, they peaked out about 175, 180. They took their insulin 20 minutes before eating. The folks that peaked out above 225, same meal, same insulin, same person on a different day, of course. They took their insulin either at the time of the meal or 20 minutes after eating. So if you take your insulin as you start your meal, you're behind the 8 ball already. And one of the most important things you could do to strike the spike is to really do your best and take your insulin early before you eat, at least 20 minutes. Now, I want you to note that these folks started off the meal pretty good range, a little over 150. If this study was done where they all started off at 200, I would strongly suggest taking your insulin at least 30 to 40 minutes before eating. Give that insulin a chance to start working, to bring down your blood sugar before you ingest a bunch of nutrients, food. So timing is everything. It's so important. If you look at the TCOYD book that you can get free on our website and also in the health fair, you can download it like that. The ebook, it has a little scale. The higher your blood sugar, the longer you should wait before eating. Just common sense. Until insulin is, if you ever take inhaled insulin, you don't have to wait because it works so fast. But we're talking about generic products on this lecture. Now, I just did want to mention one last thing. You may not have access to pens. These are a picture of a bunch of older pens. But if you do have access, if you can get them cheaper, they are convenient, they're discreet, and very importantly, they protect the insulin from light, heat, and agitation. So those things can denature insulin and make it a little bit less potent. So if you can get a pen, that's great. Okay, so the basal bolus therapy with rapid-acting insulins with meals and snacks and generic long-acting insulins, that's the way to go. And this is a picture of how it would look. And you're doing your best to mimic what happens in the non-diabetic state, which is the gray shaded areas. And those 4 arrows are when people are eating. Now, what about glucagon? You really should have an emergency glucagon. This is the older version. It's a pain in the ass. The person doing it has to shove in the diluting fluid to the powder, the glucagon powder. Then you got to make sure it's mixed up, and then you got to bring it back out. Then you have to inject somebody. Well, we're stuck with that. And every type 1 needs to have one and teach their loved ones how to use it. Now, there are newer formulations. Now, they do have some programs where you might be able to get it very inexpensively or for free with patient assistance programs. So the one on the left is called Baqsimi, and the one on the right is called Gvoke. And one's the Gvoke auto injector pen is like an EpiPen. The nasal glucagon Baqsimi is for the nose. Now, why don't I have the names on here? Because I use this slide for continuing medical education lecture for healthcare professionals, and you have to take off the trade names, and I forgot to put them back on. So Baqsimi by Lilly and Gvoke by Xeris. Okay, exercise makes up for mistakes. Anybody see anything wrong with this picture? Yeah, people are not exercising when they can. I can tell you it's one of the most important ways to keep your blood sugars under good control. Now, for type 2s, you can exercise, brings down your blood sugar, awesome. For type 1s, we have to worry about hypoglycemia. Yeah, I know this picture's pretty funny. What about the subway station in Sweden? What do you think? This is a true painting on the floor in Sweden. You know what you have to do in Sweden to find someone that's fat? You gotta look around. There's not that many. Now, what about me? I look very svelte. I work hard at it, and I'm going to show you a picture of me without a shirt on. I don't like to show my personal stuff, but I did take it from the waist up. I was completely naked. There I am. Yeah. That is my physique. It takes a lot of time, folks. Now, what about a low carb diet? All type 1s are thinking about low carbs. It works. It reduces the margin of error. It's not easy to adhere to, but there are a lot of information and recipes on low carb stacks. I'm going to show you mine. Try it for 1 week to see the effects of carbs on your blood sugar, or see the effects of reduced carbs on your blood sugar. And it does help you get back on track. You may not have to do it forever. I think that if you can reduce the carbs in your diet to the point where you're happy with your diet, and of course, we all love bread and pizza and beer. Oh my God, couldn't live without it. But you try to do things to reduce your carb intake. So I'm going to tell you about 3 recipes that I made, and I eat these a lot. It's Steve's Maple Sausage Scramble. There's no maple syrup on this, but you can buy these frozen turkey sausages, breakfast sausages, and they call them maple sausage. They smell just like maple syrup. And I believe 3 is like 120 to 150 calories. I put them in the microwave, and because they're already cooked, and then I chop them up and I cook it with egg beaters. And you can see the egg beaters down there. I use everything bagel seasoning, and I put a little bit of mozzarella cheese. That's the lowest calorie cheese. And it's probably the lowest calorie, lowest fat food you could eat that's filling. I mean, look at that plate. That's a big pile of egg beaters. And I'll tell you what, egg beaters are awesome. Low in calories, 0 cholesterol. And I think the key with egg beaters is what you do to make it taste better. And that everything bagel seasoning at Costco is awesome. Now, how about time and range tacos? Screw Taco Tuesday. This can be eaten any day of the week. And this is basically, the recipes are on our website. It's turkey meat, turkey meat, crumpled up, cooked with seasoning. And then you just put it inside a lettuce wrap like that. And you can put a little bit of cheese and a hot sauce. And you can see those aren't small tacos, those are big tacos. And really the only thing you're eating with calories is the meat and a little bit of the cheese. So these really do not destroy your blood sugar. And lastly, Steve's Big Ass Salad. And what do? I go to Costco, go to any old store. I buy romaine lettuce, red, yellow, and what's the third one? Orange peppers. cut them all up, can of olives, tomatoes, cucumbers, and I put them in a big bowl. That's a bowl I got in Seattle when I went to visit my good friend Earl Hirsch. And I'll tell you the rest of that story. And I use it for 3 or 4 meals. I put it in a container. And this sauce is a killer. Smoked sesame sauce. Oh my God. Sesame seed. It is the tastiest sauce. Now, it is higher in calories, but that's the only thing I'm using. I try to drizzle on just enough. I even try to experiment and mix it with lower calorie dressings. So it's good. And then you could put some protein on there. You can get some chicken. You can put some salmon. I usually sometimes use a can of tuna fish or a canned salmon that I also get at Costco. So these are 3 recipes, and they do not wreck my blood sugar. Here's some other snacks. Egg beaters on the right. Nuts, don't eat too many, but it does help suppress your hunger for sure. All these companies are coming out with Parmesan cheese crackers, very low carbs, made of cheese. You can even eat a piece of cheese on top of the cheese cracker. I love beef jerky, 0 fat, 0 carbs, pretty much. Cauliflower rice is awesome. Tastes like CRAP alone, but when you put stuff on it, soy sauce or whatever you're mixing it with, it does taste better. And then peanut butter. I love peanut butter. This stuff that you can buy at CVS, at Costco, it's powdered peanut butter. You mix water with it to the consistency that you would like. You can make it really thick, and you can dip. I usually just make some in a bowl, and I dip a celery in there. It's 1/3 the calorie of peanut butter. Now, I just want you to pay attention to the foods we eat in society. It's your choice. Please don't tell me ever in person that you hate the taste of diet soda, so you drink regular soda. That kills me. I'd much rather you have a donut, a piece of cake, and try to bolus for that. But regular soda is just wasted calories. There's so many good diet drinks out there. You got Crystal Light. You got Diet Root Beer, one of the best diet drinks to get used to diet on. Diet Orange. You got Diet Mountain Dew. You got the little Neo drops that you can put in your drink to make it taste good. Vitamin Water Zero. The Bai drinks, like Cocoa Bai is my favorite. A little bit of Malibu rum. But please do not drink wasted calories that will jack your blood sugars out of the park. Now, what about cinnamon? How many of you have heard that cinnamon lowers the glucose values? I've been eating 3 Cinnabons a day. It hasn't helped my blood sugars at all. Thank you for laughing at that. I got to sneeze. Hold on. Okay. What about that 5-pound hamburger? If you want a juicy hamburger once in a while, have it. But just don't eat one every single day. This is a hamburger that's advertised as 5 pounds hamburger. And those are pickles on top, tons of cheese. If you eat it all in 1 hour, you get it for free. Okay. And when you get low, don't eat everything in sight. I know everything tastes so good. Peanut butter, cupcakes, ice cream, Oreos, Snickers, fig bars. Those will take a little bit of time to bring up your blood sugar, and you're going to be in the 400 plus zone. So try to stick to juice. I love apple juice as my go-to. Jeremy's son, Cooper, loves pineapple juice. He doesn't have diabetes, but he still loves pineapple juice. Glucose tabs, Starburst, Skittles, any kind of candy that's pure sugar. And around Halloween time, I love the candy corns, and I guess Thanksgiving too. Love them, just absolutely love them. I take 15 to 20, I put them in a little Ziploc bag, and I just carry those in case I get low. Problem is, it's hard to stop at 12 to 15. Okay, now, you guys got to see this lecture. It's called Finding Your Sweet Spot, How to Improve Your Time and Range. I put a lot of time into that lecture. It's in our video vault, and it emphasizes many of the things we talked about today. It talks about some of the newer insulins and devices that you may not have access to, but it does have some other techniques. Our website is a great site for information resources, including how to get certain medications cheap, how to list of patient support services. We also hooked up with needymeds.org. There's a whole bunch of these. There's GoodRx. You can make sure you do your homework when trying to get medications cheaper. And there's a lot of resources for you type 1s on insulin. You can go back and go to some of these websites, and you can get help. Ever since the cost of insulin went through the roof, there was a big uproar, and there are places you can get help. And even our government has the Financial Help Diabetes Care site. Go to the booth in the health fair. Go to the Lilly booth. Go to the Novo booth. Go to the Sanofi booth. Go to the Mankind booth. Find out about their insulins. See if they have any programs. And we have on our website, we have diabetes topics A to Z. Type in anything there for any information on any other topics. And don't forget our type 1 community. We got our T1D Facebook, and go on there and get some buddies that you can talk to and ask questions to. So remember, it's never too late to take control of your diabetes, even on the cheap. So take control of your diabetes. You owe it to yourself and your family members.